If a champion has to overpay for his speed, he stops buying it. Max Biaggi does not speak like a fan. He speaks like a man who has already stood on the far side of greatness and discovered the ugly part people hide from the highlights. When he looks at Marc Márquez and says the 10th world title could be the point where priorities change, he is not building a fairy tale ending. He is describing the exit logic of a rider who refuses to become a slow version of himself. People hear 10th title and think Biaggi is pointing at a number, like this is a scoreboard problem. But Biaggi is pointing at something more dangerous: closure. The moment a rider achieves the last symbolic target, the sport stops being a hunt and starts becoming a negotiation. Negotiation with time, negotiation with pain, negotiation with risk. And for Marc, negotiation is not living, it is losing. Marc Márquez is not built to fade out. He is built to cut the power when the light starts flickering. He is the standard, and he knows it. Not in a polite, motivational way. In the only way a true standard exists, everything around him is measured against him, and he can feel the measurement change before the crowd hears it. That is why Biaggi's comment matters. It is not a retirement prediction. It is a warning that Marc's career is governed by a private threshold, and the 10th title is the cleanest doorway to step through before the sport gets a vote. Biaggi understands this because he recognizes the one thing fans never want to admit about champions. They do not retire because they cannot race. They retire because racing stops feeling like control. Marc's entire identity in MotoGP is control through domination. Not control through comfort. Not control through longevity. Control through hierarchy. He needs to know that if the grid is cruel, he is crueler. If the track is tight, he is tighter. If the moment is chaotic, he is the one turning chaos into points. That is why he became a monster in the first place. And here's the part that makes people uncomfortable. The injuries did not just hurt Marc. They educated him. They taught him the cost of pushing past the body's warnings, not once, but repeatedly, as a lifestyle. They taught him what it means to win while the body keeps receipts. When he left Honda, it was not romance. It was accounting. It was a rider looking at the math and refusing to pay for someone else's failure to give him a weapon. That decision tells you how this ends. Marc will not stay in MotoGP to be celebrated. He will not stay to be respected. He will not stay because the sport needs him. He will stay only as long as the sport remains a place where he can be the standard without borrowing time from his body at a predatory interest rate. This is why Biaggi points to 10. 10 is not hunger. 10 is proof. 10 is a lock on the door behind him. 10 allows him to leave with the final sentence written in permanent ink. I came back. I dominated again. I restored the hierarchy. I closed the argument. And once the argument is closed, what is left? For most riders, what is left is the joy of racing, the love of the paddock, the comfort of routine, the thrill of being present. For Marc, what is left is something darker: exposure. Because when you have already proven everything, every additional season carries more downside than upside. If you win, you repeat the proof. If you lose, you create a new narrative you cannot control. If you stay long enough, you eventually become the veteran who gets passed by a kid whose name you used to ignore. If you hang around, the sport turns your past into a museum piece and your present into a curiosity. Marc does not do curiosities. He does verdicts. This is where Biaggi's perspective is lethal. Biaggi knows the moment the internal conversation changes from "how do I win" to "how do I keep winning without breaking myself." That shift sounds smart to fans. It sounds mature. It sounds like experience. To a predator, it sounds like the beginning of compromise. Marc's greatest seasons were not built on compromise. They were built on taking more than the circuit was willing to give. He used to treat risk like a natural resource he could extract endlessly. That is what made him terrifying. The grid did not fear his pace alone. The grid feared his willingness to keep pressing after other riders would call it enough. Now imagine a future where Marc has to press, not because he wants to, but because he must. That is the line. He has said the line in public in the simplest way possible. He will retire when he can no longer finish on the podium. People treat that like arrogance. It is not arrogance. It is a definition of identity. The podium is not a trophy stand to Marc. It is proof that the hierarchy still exists and he still sits in it. The second the hierarchy flips, the second the podium becomes something he must chase with desperation. He is finished, even if the results are still respectable, because respectable is not the Marc Márquez standard. Here is the standard. If someone is faster and adapts faster, and Marc has to push his body beyond the limit to match that pace, he calls it done. That is not weakness. That is clarity. Marc's career has been defined by unpredictable moves that are not emotional. They are surgical. The Honda exit was a surgical move. It was Marc acknowledging that staying in a broken system would eventually force him to overpay for wins. He refused. He moved. He took control. Biaggi knows that the final move will be the same kind of surgery, and it will not happen when Marc becomes slow. It will happen when Marc becomes expensive. Expensive to his body, expensive to his recovery, expensive to his future life outside the sport, expensive to his ability to train without fear, expensive to his ability to wake up without feeling like he has to earn basic mobility. That is what fans miss when they talk about racing for passion. Passion is a cheap word. Passion is what people say when they cannot explain the cost. Marc is not a passion rider. He is a consequence rider. He respects everyone, yes, but he respects them in the only way a killer respects opponents, by not pretending he can live among them if he is no longer the sharpest blade. That is why the idea of Marc racing until 40 is fantasy. The legacy tour archetype is for riders whose relationship with the sport becomes social. Marc's relationship with the sport is transactional. The sport gives him a battlefield where he can be the standard. He gives the sport the violence of certainty. When that transaction stops working, he leaves. Biaggi is staring straight at that transaction. The 10th title is simply the cleanest moment to end it, because 10 is not just a number. 10 is a psychological permission slip. If Marc hits 10, he will have done something that rewrites the injury era as a pause, not a decline. It rewrites the Honda collapse as the end of a bad partnership, not the end of a great rider. It rewrites the last chapter as domination, not survival. And once that is done, the next question becomes personal, not competitive. How much of your body are you willing to trade to keep proving what you already proved? This is why Biaggi says priorities change. He is not saying Marc becomes soft. He is saying Marc becomes finished with the need to negotiate. Because here is the brutal truth. At the top level, the sport is always trying to force negotiations. Negotiation with age, negotiation with younger riders, negotiation with new tires, new rules, new bikes, negotiation with the idea that everyone gets older. Marc's entire career is a rejection of that philosophy. He does not accept everyone. He accepts only hierarchy. So the day the grid produces a rider who is not just faster on a Sunday, but faster in adaptation, faster in learning, faster in extracting pace without overreaching, that is the day Marc's mind labels the future as occupied. And if the future is occupied, Marc does not squat. He exits. This is the part that makes Biaggi's comment feel heavy. Biaggi knows Marc will not wait until the results become embarrassing. He will not wait until he is a weekend story about struggle and resilience. He will not wait until he becomes a veteran reference point for younger riders. He will not allow the sport to watch him decline. He will choose the moment. Fans want endings that feel fair. Marc does not care about fair endings. He cares about endings that preserve the standard. That is why Biaggi's 10th title theory is not about 10. It is about timing. Biaggi is telling you that once the last symbolic target is reached, Marc's decision-making becomes brutally pure. With the record achieved, the only variable left is bodily cost. Without the need to chase, the only reason to continue is appetite for competition, and appetite is not infinite when the body has already been through war. And Marc's body has been through war. Not the fan version of war, the real version. The version where surgeries are not dramatic, they are maintenance. The version where training is not celebration, it is compensation. The version where one mistake can restart the cycle of pain that steals months. Biaggi knows that a rider with that history does not retire slowly. He retires instantly, because the moment you begin managing your body as the primary project, racing becomes secondary. And the moment racing becomes secondary, the standard dies. Marc will not watch the standard die. He will remove himself before it is killed. That is the brutal elegance of his retirement rule: podium or exit. Not because the podium is a prize, but because the podium is proof that he is still the measuring stick. And this is where the emotional arc tightens. Marc is not a man chasing joy. He is a man chasing alignment. Alignment between body and intent. Alignment between risk and reward. Alignment between the version of himself he believes in and the version the sport demands. When those alignments break, Marc becomes dangerous to himself. He will push too far to restore them. That is exactly what his career showed in the past. So now, older and smarter, the most Marc Márquez thing he can do is not to keep pushing. It is to stop before pushing becomes self-harm. Biaggi sees that maturity, and he recognizes it as the last stage before exit. People will call it quitting. It is not. It is control, because Marc is the kind of champion who would rather leave while still feared than stay long enough to be politely praised. He would rather disappear with questions still hanging than remain and answer them with diminished results. He is the standard. Standards do not negotiate with time. They either remain absolute or they stop being standards. So the real story is not whether Marc wins a 10th title. The real story is what happens the day Marc senses the sport is beginning to require something he refuses to give: his body beyond the limit, week after week, not for conquest, but for relevance. That day, his mind will become quiet. Not because he is sad, because he is done. And when Marc is done, the sport does not get a ceremony. It gets a void. That is why Biaggi's words land like a threat. He is not telling you Marc will retire. Everyone retires. He is telling you Marc will retire on a moment that preserves the standard, not on a moment that pleases the crowd. He is telling you the ending will be clean, which means it will feel cruel. Now, the questions that matter, the questions that decide whether Biaggi is right in the way that actually counts. If Marc reaches the final target and the body asks for one more season of payment, does he sign that invoice or does he tear it up? If a younger rider becomes faster, not just on race day but in adaptation, and Marc's only response is to overpush, does he accept the future? Or does he leave before the future touches him? And if the sport wakes up one day and realizes the standard walked away without warning, will everyone finally understand that Marc Márquez never raced for legacy, only for control? Biaggi's line about priorities is also a message about time, not calendar time, identity time. There is a phase where a champion is still feared, and there is a later phase where the fear becomes historical. The crowd claps because they remember, not because they expect. Marc will not allow that conversion. The second he senses that people are watching him like an artifact, he will remove himself before the sport can turn him into a ceremonial presence. This is where the emotional arc lives, because Marc's emotion is not soft. It is not sentimental. It is a private, violent loyalty to the standard he set when he was younger. That standard is the only teammate he trusts. Every season he races, he is racing against his own peak, not the grid. The grid is just the scoreboard. The real conflict is internal. Can he still do it without bargaining, without stretching recovery, without asking the body for extra credit it may not repay? Biaggi sees the danger in how disciplined Marc became after the injury years. Discipline keeps you alive, but it also teaches you something frightening. You can win while holding back. Once a rider learns that, a second thought follows like a shadow. If I can win while holding back, what happens when I stop holding back? What does it cost, and what does it damage permanently? The more mature Marc becomes, the more clearly he can price that decision. And pricing the decision is the first step toward refusing it. That is why the 10th title matters. It is a clean ending that does not require the sport to witness decline. It is an exit that protects the standard. If Marc reaches it, he does not need to test the next phase of time, the phase where recovery gets slower, where crashes cost more, where the rider starts choosing safety over domination. That phase exists for everyone. Marc will choose not to live in it publicly. Biaggi's line about priorities is also a message about time. Not calendar time, identity time. There is a phase where a champion is still feared, and there is a later phase where the fear becomes historical. The crowd claps because they remember, not because they expect. Marc will not allow that conversion. The second he senses that people are watching him like a museum piece, he will take the exhibit down himself. That is why Marc's emotion is not nostalgia, it is standard. He does not measure himself against the field. He measures the field against the version of himself that once did impossible things without thinking. When he says he will stop when he cannot make the podium, he is not talking about 3 faster riders as a statistic. He is describing the moment the sport forces him to chase, to compensate, to override, to live in reaction. Marc does not live in reaction. Reaction is what you do when you are no longer the reference. Biaggi understands the private violence of that transition. Because the hardest part is not losing pace. The hardest part is learning that your old solutions no longer solve the new problems. The body needs more warm-up. The tire needs more management. The risk needs more justification. Every more is a signal that the sport is asking you to become a different person. Marc will not become a different person to keep racing. He will stop racing to keep himself. So the 10th title is not a finish line. It is a permission slip. It allows Marc to leave without unfinished business, without the small doubt that could drag him into one more season, one more surgery, one more compromise. It lets him end the story at full volume, not fade it out. And if Marc ends it at full volume, the ending will look cold to the outside world. Inside his head, it will feel clean.